we were talking earlier about the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah.
Oh yes.
And the idea of the Daleen, which the whole section ending with this phrase that they have bartered away guidance and bought error. Bought Daleen, become Dalla, lost.
Yes.
They've given away the guidance.
Drift away from the straight path.
Indeed. Now, this brings the idea that that section is about Daleen. The previous section, which is talking about Alladhina Kafaru, is about the Kafaru, and the section before that is about Al-Muhsinin,
Al-Muttaqun, who benefit.
Yes. So there are these mirroring the three categories in Al-Fatiha, where you have those who have given the ni'mah of Allah, and those who have the wrath, and those who have Daleen. So this kind of, the Quran is an answer to this dua. At the beginning section, it says, this is the book of guidance for those who are muttaqi.
Yes.
So the whole section is, reflects the beginning of Al-Fatiha.
Yes, it reflects the beginning. It follows beautifully from the Ihdina as-Sirat al-Mustaqim. And it says, here is the guidance, Al-Huda. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه means there is no doubt whatsoever that it is a scripture from God. And it is Huda lil-Muttaqin. Provides guidance for those who are conscious of God. Then it describes them, who they are, their qualities. الذين يؤمنون بالغيب. You see, you can't dismiss غيب because there are so many things which are غيب for us.
And the ghaib means not that it's in principle not seen, but it's not yet revealed. As you were explaining.
It's not revealed. It's not seen.
But
it is not here.
It's not that it's impossible to see it in principle, but the things that have not yet been seen.
Exactly, and this applies particularly. You can't say we would like to see God and how does he have a hand or this or that. That's ghaib. That ghaibs cannot be. But there is a ghaib of what is coming, for instance, on the day of judgment. That's ghaib and it is coming. La rayba fihi. Quran talks about particularly about the day of judment. Is la rayba fihi. There is no doubt about it because the Arabs were so physical in their approach to life that they only believe in what they can see or catch. So they demanded physical miracles from the prophets and were not satisfied with less than that. Then they demanded with physical proof of the resurrection by saying to the prophet, fine, bring our forefathers to us so we can see them, then we will believe in this idea of al-ghaib, of al-akhirah.
It's interesting how much it contrasts with the verse about the kafirin, which says that there's a veil over their eyes and they cannot see. And
well done,
so
beautiful.
The contrast is where someone sees, who can understand that something exists and something is real, even though they can't see it.
Yes.
And those who not only reject that, but they close their eyes, they can't see what's in front of them.
They dismiss everything as if, as you said, as if they close their eyes, so there is a mask or something covering on their eyes.
It's the sense.
And on their ears as well, they don't want to listen. You see, these Arabs to whom the Prophet preached, they did not want to listen. They resist listening. They say they were definitely said, we have a covering on our ears from what you say. And they don't want others to listen. So they themselves keep away from the Quran and try to keep others away from it.
And I think that the idea, it's actually described as it's interesting that this moving from passive to active, and where Allah says, I mean, there's various examples of this. We have it in Al-Fatiha. You have Allah is connected very much. He's giving an amta. Okay, it's Him. Whereas it's Al-Maghdubi. It's not connected to Allah.
No.
And the same, I think, in this idea of it says, for them they have a veil over their eyes, and so on and so on. And
it's a figure of speech, you see.
But it's also about personal. When there's punishment, it's not Allah punishing; it's a natural consequence of their actions.
Their own action.
So, in a sense, Allah is in control of all the consequences. He sets the rules, so it's Him in control. But it's not Allah. But when there's a reward, it is Allah is giving the reward. Allah is giving them now. But
this is all because, you see, the Qur'an doesn't want at any time to be seen to be forcing people, coercing people to believe. Even God has every power.
Yeah, I was going to come up
to do this, but
this is an interesting point. I mean, there's a verse specifically saying something like this. If Allah wanted, He could have made everyone believe.
Yes.
Will you make people believe? Will you try and force them? No.
Oh,
Allah does not want it.
This is the Prophet ﷺ was so committed to the message that he would not give up or give in. Absolutely. Throughout his life, right from the day,
always
from day one of the message to the last day, he was in jihad because people from the beginning said the kuffar rejected him, and this went on throughout the Meccan period. Went to Medina, there was still kuffar, and there were a Jewish community which gave him a very difficult time. And there was the munafiqun, the hypocrites.
But this brings us on
even the Muslim community itself gave the Prophet difficult time by it wasn't easy to get them to give up their ideas about women and orphans and so on.
Yes.
And to give up the ideas to tell them to part with their money.
Yes.
And give some of it away. It's difficult.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's kind of, I want to talk about this section we talked about at the beginning of the Quran, which is really that, and perhaps the next page, about half the next page at least, is still talking about the Da'aleen. But it starts with the idea that it starts by talking about there are people who say we believe, but they are not with the believers.
Yes.
All right, so that they try. It's usually referred to as the whole section referring to the hypocrites, but not the normal Muslims. But the thing about this is a question of what level of hypocrisy is there in people, and how much there is. Because these people, you're saying, they had accepted Islam, but they were reluctant to do what was told.
Some of them were arrogant, so they say, no, we don't. Sometimes they said, how are we to believe like these riff-raff people?
Yes. And in fact, the verses talk about, they say, are we to believe like the Sufaha?
Yes.
And no, indeed, they are the Sufaha. They are the idiots, and they don't even know it. And this is it's interesting section. It's a whole very interesting section. But this brings me on to the subject of how we get people who declare themselves to be Muslim, and then they do terrible things sometimes.
Yes.
And this is
yes.
These are, but is it that they? Can you be sincere if you are saying you're Muslim, but you don't know what the Quran says about the topic, and you still go and act in a like some of these violent people who do terrible things? They act, and we have found out, like half the people they have found out who were involved in ISIS, for example, they knew nothing of the Quran, they knew nothing of their religion, they were just politically motivated. So can you be sincere?
And they, you see this arrogance that they think they know.
Yes.
When others who are better informed and can see what the Quran
I'll give you an
really
example
means.
of this. That some of the attitudes that were on display then, and you find it in others, is they say you have to use force. And I would say that the mantra almost of the likes of ISIS, whoever they were, whoever controlled them, whoever directed them, would be phrased by coming out of the phrase al-din al-ikrah.
Yeah.
Which is completely the opposite of Islam, but that's how that's what they did.
Some people think that they are more Muslim. They should be more Muslims than what the Quran requires Muslim to do.
Yes. So again, we talk about this, and people. I mean, recently people have talked about the cartoons of Muhammad and so on, and this mocking of the Prophet. It happened in his time. So much, and it's described in the Quran in so many different passages. And what does the Quran tell Muhammad about what to do?
Yes, it says naturally he will, if the Quran tells him to explain بالحسنى الموعظة الحسنة ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة, but in the end it says to him get on with your worship. إنا كفيناك المستهزئين. Those who are mockery, to mock Islam and mock the message, forget about them and get on with your. Naturally, Muslims are angry with what these silly people do, and they should, of course, express their dissatisfaction and their anger, and in many ways, what they are doing in Muslim world now, in the Muslim countries. I mean, the French president says we have freedom of expression. We cannot force people to give this up. The Muslim world can say, fine, we also have freedom of action. We will not buy French goods.
Absolutely. This is an
that is reasonable, but not to attack the French or to.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the couple of verses that I think about, one I think you will know the verses because you know the Quran better than me by a long way. But there's one which says if you find people talking vain talk and mocking, then you should just leave their company.
Leave away.
So just walk away.
Yes.
This is what the Quran says what to do. Not to go and attack them.
ما عليك من حسابهم من شيء. You will not be blamed or carry the burdens of their account.
Yes, indeed.
In the akhirah is not.
This is
mentioned
in many ways in the Quran. For example, it talks about the Prophet is talked about who have not been made to watch over their affairs. Your duty is just to give the message, or your duty. This is quite common.
It. And this keeps recurring in the Quran because, as I said, the Prophet ﷺ was so keen, so committed to the message that he tried again and again and again and again. The Quran keeps reminding him.
It's not his job that they do what's right. It's they will be held to account for what they do.
Not you.
You will not. And so there's another verse that also comes to mind where it's more explicit, where it says, Allah is well aware of what they say about you. But you are not one to overwhelm them with a show of force.
Oh yes, indeed.
So you know this verse? You can remember it?
فأنت تكره الناس حتى يكونوا مؤمنين. Are you going to can you force them to become believers when God has said and has planned that many people will not be Muslim or believers?
I think this is a different verse, but it's the same. There's lots of verses that make these points. The word I'm thinking of, it says, I don't remember where it is. Anyway, we'll maybe come back to it later. But it says specifically that Allah is well aware of what they say, and you are not one to overcome them with force, but instead remind those who fear my warning, or remind those who are attentive. It's at the end of Surah 49, I think, something like that. Anyway, we'll come back to it. Okay, I'll bring it out. Anyway, the point is that there are many cases where the Prophet ﷺ was mocked at the time, and it's very clear in the Quran how we respond. We leave the discussions we don't want to be part of. We just leave them. That's their business. They lakum dinukum waliya din. To them, their way. to us ours. We're not accountable if people start. There's no point talking to people when they're like that. You keep away from conversations which are not respectful.
واخفض جناحك للمؤمنين. Concentrate on your own community, the faithful. Lower the wing of mercy to the followers. And forget about these other people. God will deal with them.
And in fact, this whole attitude of the emphasizing the lack, as we talked about, I didn't translate, but this phrase ikraha means compulsion. So in the Quran famously says la ikraha fi din. You cannot force people in the religion into Islam. And there's a lot which could be talked about this particular thing about force, because it's connected with enlightenment. It's connected with knowledge. You can take it all the way back into the very fundamentals about moral accountability we talked about just a moment ago at the beginning. The core of the teaching of the Day of Judgment and the teaching of Islam.
Yes.
This idea of individual accountability. So if someone is forced to believe, where's the accountability? They must do so. They must be free to believe and think, and only then they can be accountable for what they believe and think. I'm not going to be held to account for what someone else thinks, and they're not going to be held to account for what I think.
This is what the Prophet was instructed to do in Mecca. This should apply to the Muslims and outside the Muslim world. Here, because we are in the same situation. He was all around him. The vast majority were non-Muslims, and some of them were offensive. And here we have vast majority of people who are non-Muslims. Most of them, very many people here are lovely people, polite, and don't interfere with you, don't force their ideas on you. And they expect of Muslims not to force their ideas on them. We shouldn't.
Well, we wouldn't in any case, whether majority or minority. But when the Muslims came into areas,
and here in this country, I have to say, and I keep saying that I mean, I have found people in this country. I come from outside this country. As a Muslim, it's much better for me to be living here than in many countries in the world. People are nice, they are pleasant, some of them are lovely, are very helpful, polite as well. That distinguishes them from some other countries where they say, this is our freedom and we have the freedom to insult other people. They don't do it here.
Yes. Well, there's always this English-French thing about how
you see that, different. As I said, the Muslims they should be reasonable. And Denmark started this, and yet when they found that it is so bad for relationship with Muslims, they stopped it. You don't force your offense on other people.
Yes, I mean,
keep saying this is our freedom, and we have freedom in this country, in Britain, and they don't lose any of their freedom by not insulting Muslims in this country.
Indeed, well, there's a level of,
or in Germany or whatever.
There's a thing in Parliament, all right, where it's supposed to be maximum freedom of speech, but the one thing that you're not allowed to do in Parliament is insult. Okay, which is very interesting where the line is drawn, because if I insult someone, I'm effectively saying I'm moving the conversation about what is the good policy into don't listen to this person, he's an idiot.
Yes.
And that basically is shutting down free speech. When you start insulting, it fundamentally shuts down free speech instead of opening it up. So this is a difficult thing to work out, because one person's insult is not to another person an insult. So it's a question of whether it's clear or not. If you start basically saying in Parliament, this man over here is a liar, or he's or insulting in some way, you're effectively saying he doesn't have the right to speak, or you shouldn't listen to what he says. So once you start introducing insults, you've moved the discussion from a it moves into what's called.
I certainly do not wish any Muslims to insult people here or anywhere.
Yeah, sure. There's no need, and it doesn't help the conversation.
Silly. يعني disruptive, and it doesn't get any result.
Yes.
Except
if you can, and this is the thing, you can criticize someone's ideas, criticize someone's policies without insulting them. You can say this was a bad idea, this is a bad policy, this is a bad thing.
Everything they do here, I say, well, this is their culture. I'm not going to say you should change your ways. It is enough that Muslims are allowed to live in their religion without oppression or interference. That is enough. You get on and try to be Muslim, and so show how good your faith is by being good to other people.
And this is, I think, the core of when you have this idea of freedom of religion, which is and individual moral accountability requires that freedom of religion. It's not just an individual freedom. It's a collective freedom to organize yourself, to pray together, to worship together, to make agreements between people that meets their conscience. They're both obeying their conscience. And this is where we move from individual freedom to collective freedom, and then how we organize and how we actually set things up. So this is we talked about, I said this phrase, which was what the violent extremists, you might call them, they basically go with the notion that al-din al-ikraha, religion is imposed, all right? Which is contrary, 100% opposite of what the Quran teaches, which is la ikraha fi din. But this phrase, I want to come to talk about this grammatically, what this phrase means. If you take in Arabic, there's lots of phrases like this. Ad-din an-nasiha. The religion is sincerity.
Yes.
Okay. But it means something quite specific. It means that without sincerity, there's no religion. In the same sense, so there's sincerity, and within sincerity is religion. You cannot have it outside. The religion does not work outside. And the same is
مخلصين له الدين, as the Quran, being sincere in your faith.
Yes.
And in your religion.
And you have another phrase that's very known for this is al-hajj arafah, which is the hajj is arafah, which means that if you get to arafah, then you have done the hajj. If you haven't got to arafah, you haven't done the hajj. So the hajj is without arafah is that if you get to arafah, you can have done the hajj.
Yes.
But if you don't, it's the
this is way in Arabic. In Arabic, and you can see it in the Islamic way of saying this particular type of saying. Al-Hajj Arafah.
Yes.
من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فلا يؤذي جاره. If you actually believe, in God and al-yawm al-akhir, do not harm your neighbor. Whoever believes should not. As if it means if you harm your neighbor, you are not really a true believer.
And this sense of din and nasiha, and that all these people who are dalla, who are astray, are those who believe they should take a bit of religion and leave a bit of religion.
Yeah, I know.
And this is hypocrisy. So dalla is connected with hypocrisy.
For those who believe that being in this country, you would have to behave. I tell you, I had received a letter from one man or whatever, must be extremist Muslim, blaming me after seeing a film that I had shaken hands with the Queen. He said, "How can you shake hands with a mother, with a woman?" And I shook hands with the principals of my college in Cambridge, Fitzwilliam College. How can you be a Muslim in this country and feel that he thinks I'm dal. He said, "Ila dallin." That's what he addressed me. Addressed me as a dal because I shook hand. Imagine the woman, they shake hand with the Queen, honoring me. She extended her hand, and possibly she had a gloves on or something, I don't remember, to say, no, I shouldn't, because in Islam, if you can't live here as a decent Muslim, you shouldn't be here. And part of decency, you are being honored to say, no, I am not going to shake hands with the Queen, or my principal of my college in Cambridge. She extended her hand to me. I said, these are, and I can tell you, I've got a letter here. They think that I am dal. If you think you have to be crude, rough, impolite to be a Muslim, that's what they think.
Yes, and
they shouldn't be in this country themselves.
But they don't realize that
they should go and live with people like themselves in a remote part of a village, in subcontinent.
They follow one part of the Sunnah in some way, they think, but they completely avoid all the parts of the Sunnah about how the Prophet was gentle. And we talked about Shurah, for example. He was called all ear, you know, because in the Quran they relate one insult. One of the things they say about him was all ear. All he did, he listened to people. He was consulting with them all the time, and it was so common and so often that he became insulted as being he's nothing but ear. He just listens to everybody, and the Quran, Allah comes to defend him, that he wants the good for you, and there's nothing wrong with him listening to everybody all this time. And another verse on Shurah that is well known. And we think about Shurah. The Shurah is consultation. You make decisions by listening to people around you. It tells him, and it's in the middle of a battle, and the context is people are coming to him, and they're quite rude. You can tell because of the context. They're coming and saying, "You're doing it all wrong. You should do this. You should do that. You should do the other." And he says, "It says, pray for their forgiveness."
This is against the basic principles of Islam and politeness.
Yeah. But people, the Prophet's example in return, when he's insulted, when he's criticized, he's gentle back to them because he wants to hear what they have to say. Yeah. And he's, in fact, it's told in the verse about Shurah in the Quran. He says, and ask for their forgiveness, and then do the Shurah and put your trust in Allah. So it's not just you only consult with people who are polite and you listen to everyone, and you have to stay polite.
There are some people who keep saying that there are extremists among Muslims. It doesn't have to be extremists in violence, but extremists in your view. There are people like this. There are people like this. I mean, I am.
But is it not
I'm
in
a
a sense
professor
of,
in the university.
Yeah.
And if I'm seeing the director and she is a woman, and she extends her hand to me to shake hands, I take my hand away and say, go away, or something like that. This is, if anybody who thinks that who thinks that this is Islam, or Islam means that they shouldn't be here.
I think now with COVID, you'll have to do the elbow bump.
Yeah.
Something else, because they say it's too risky with infections and so on. Anyway, they're starting to everyone wears niqab now as well, so it's fun. Okay, so I just wanted to, this idea of Shurah is also there. This amruhum shura bainahum. It's the same structure as al-haddu arafah.
Yes.
And this sense is that there is no amr, there is no decision without Shurah. This concept is implied.
Applies to everything in life, not just in politics and parliaments, because that verse is Meccan and there were no politics or heads of states or anything like that. It applies. And it's within the house, it should be by Shurah.
Indeed, and the emphasis of it is that if it doesn't have Shurah, and Shurah is a process of listening to each other, if without that it's not a valid decision in some sense. It's an imposition, and therefore it's not freely agreed, and therefore it's not agreed at all. Because if you have it's like by duress.
This is against what Muslims should be. If you impose your ideas or your own ideas.
And it's not just about, it's also about a group. So it's amruhum shura bainahum.
Yes, the group.
So it means that it's not, we could say that when we have colonialism, it's the British Parliament deciding what happens in India. You see, this is amru Shurah baynana.
Different times.
It's a different thing.
Different times and different
places.
Centuries.
But this is important
So
because today,
past, this is all past. What we have here is that what will happen in parliament, that's Shurah. Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes. But the point here is that it is, you can have a Shurah, which is Shurah amrukum Shurah baynana. Your decisions are our consultations, which can happen, and this is what does happen sometimes, is people decide for other people and they impose on other people. So the importance of the pronoun here is that one group of people has no right to make decisions for another. They are each collectively responsible for themselves and not for other people. What the Quran describes people in the past is that they will get what they deserve, and you collectively will get what you deserve.
We as Muslims in this country, we should be concerned about ourselves first of everybody. We shouldn't spend our time being concerned about Muslims somewhere else. The first concern should be our own here. We should try to understand Islam and the Quran within our time here, within our circumstances.
Indeed, that we are not going to, it's like, and this is an important point about tradition, has no legal hold over us in a sense. We are responsible for how we understand what we are told to do by Allah, and they are accountable for how they understand.
Yes. We should do our best here, and because Muslims will just harm themselves by not being decent, being reasonable, being loyal to the country. If you are in this country, you have to be loyal to it.
These are your agreements.
Absolutely.
You are free to leave Muslim if you don't want to stay a part of it.
Who comes from any part of the world, by being admitted here, there is an implicit agreement that you respect and do not do anything harmful to the country. If you don't, if you break that, you are breaking a contract, an implied contract, by being given a visa.
By the act of entering.
By the fact of entering.
But there's also, I mean, if you no longer agree to the contract, you can leave.
Absolutely.
And
I said this in 2002, when there are two people who said that they are going to fight the British in Afghanistan or this or that. I said no. I said, as I understand Islam, you have come here by a contract. You are admitted here to be at peace with the people here. If you are going to fight them, then you must announce that you are no longer bound by the agreement and you are no longer a citizen of this country. Announce it, and then you are free to do whatever. But as long as you are a citizen and you have a passport and you are accepted here, you must not fight this community.